can save lots of time for questions. First of all, thank you all for joining me here. I'm excited to talk about how you can get the most out of foundational AI models. Mainly, I'm going to be talking about ChatGPT because that's the most used solution, and it's also probably the best solution for most people's use cases. So I'll just dig right in. First, I'll go through what I'm going to talk about. I'll talk about myself just briefly so that you kind of understand why I'm a good person to share information with you all about this. We'll dig into what foundational AI models are, what are some of the limitations of them. We can look at a bunch of different interesting things we can do with things like ChatGPT, and then we'll explore some techniques that can really help you get the most out of these very powerful tools. We can also talk a little bit about, this is where I get a little more opinionated, some of my opinions on what considerations might need to be made for things like ChatGPT in an educational setting. And then also I want to look into what the future might look like for us, because there's a lot of hypotheses about robots taking over the world and things like that. And I'm going to just kind of share some of my opinions on that, and then we'll have lots of time for questions. So who am I? I'm a software engineer here in Laramie, Wyoming. The name of my company is Altitype. We started out just building web and mobile applications, but over the past 3 years ago, we really focused a lot on artificial intelligence and machine learning. When ChatGPT was released about a year ago, I just dove right in and started figuring out how to build interesting things using ChatGPT. Oh no, now it took away my screen.
We can still see your screen though, Carter.
Okay, great. So I've been developing software using ChatGPT on and off for the past year. And so I've learned a lot about how it can be used both for the average person as well as people who are trying to really stretch the limits of what it can do. So what are these foundational AI models I'm talking about here? First of all, what's artificial intelligence is a good place to start. I put just a definition from the Oxford Dictionary here, but it's really about creating computer programs where a computer can act and think like a human being. And that's really like important for us to think about as what are foundational models, because in a lot of ways it is maybe the closest that we get to something like artificial intelligence. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So foundational AI models are these AI models that are trained on just a wide variety of information. It's generally unlabeled and it's generally very general data. And what makes them foundational is that they can perform a wide variety of tasks. Traditionally speaking, when many people think of AI, they think of things like facial recognition, things like that, where they're really one-trick ponies. But what's really special about these foundational models is that they're able to do many, many, many things. And the way they're able to do that is by being trained on a very wide variety of data. We're mostly going to talk about large language models, and the example that I'm going to be using is ChatGPT. But there are other types of foundational models that they could use many things as inputs. It could be things like images, it could be video, it could be telemetry. So if you imagine that you had let's say like a 3D space kind of scanner, and you were trying to understand physics, you might be able to take this very general data and create a type of foundational model that might be able to predict things like physics. But we're going to mostly talk about these large language models, mainly because they are probably the most advanced, and I think they apply most to your work in libraries. All right. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of how they work because I really want to spend a lot of time talking about how to use them. But they start out with a trained model. It literally can take over a year to train some of these models using an extreme amount of computing resources. GPT-4 was trained on over 13 trillion words. So it's an enormous amount of data. And basically what happens is this, to not get too detailed, but we have what's called a neural network. Think of it as almost just a bunch of knobs. And the idea is that you'll put some kind of input in, and the input would be something like a prompt. I give an example at the bottom, like Wyoming became a state in 1890. That would be the response. And basically what, in the training process, these knobs get turned in a very systematic kind of way in order to ensure that whatever the input is gets the correct response. And that's pretty general for much of machine learning. But I just kind of wanted to slightly touch on how that works. And then I guess it's an important question to why foundational AI models are important to a librarian, because that's why you all showed up here. I mean, they're a new source of information. We'll explore how you can pull information out of ChatGPT, but much like once upon a time, the internet was a new and scary source of information, and then Wikipedia came out, and it was, you know, maybe a new and sometimes abused source of information. This is no exception to that. It can be an absolutely amazing, great resource, but it can also be wrong. It can be very wrong, and very confidently wrong, which is a little bit scary. Another reason why I think this is very important to you all is that they're a great tool for anybody who's doing information work. Anybody whose job might be to absorb some kind of information, do some kind of tasks, or maybe people who are creating flyers for some new event, or somebody who is tasked with taking notes in a meeting like this, let's say. These are all tools that can be potentially used to make your lives easier. All right, before we talk too much about using it, I really want to talk about some of the limitations, and along the way, you'll kind of get hints as to how this might be used. So I think that maybe the first and most obvious limitation, but it's a really important one, is that these models are trained on a defined set of data. And so they're only going to know what they're trained upon. So it makes sense that if you train a model on information that's incorrect, it's going to respond with incorrect information. Also, something that we commonly see when you use ChatGPT, and there are some ways around it that we can probably touch on, but it only knows information prior to when it was trained. And like I said, these models can take upwards of a year to train. So it's very common that current events are not, they're not able to answer questions about that. And there are some ways that they can connect to the internet and kind of provide data that's helpful to actually answer questions about current events, but it's one of the ways that it lacks. And we can kind of see an example here. I asked ChatGPT, when did the current war in Israel begin? And it says, as of my last knowledge update, which, like I said, is almost a year ago, there is no ongoing current war in Israel. We all know that, unfortunately, that's not true. This is using ChatGPT 3.5, and if you pay for ChatGPT, then you're able to use some more advanced features that would actually be able to answer this correctly, because it has something called a browsing plugin, which lets it use the internet a little bit more. Another really big issue with ChatGPT is that we don't know, it's not able to establish a confidence in the answers that it gives. Many types of AI models, they're able to say, I believe with 95% correctness that the picture you showed me is a cat. Unfortunately, that's not the case with ChatGPT. And it becomes even more problematic because what it's really trained to do is mimic what it was trained upon. And the people at OpenAI that have developed ChatGPT, they've worked really hard to curate a data set that is full of correct information. And because that data set is so full of what they believe to be correct information, the tone of what's said is often a very confident kind of tone. So even when it's very wrong, it will act like it's very right. I asked it a question, how many N's are there in the word enter? And it says there are 2 words in the word enter, and we all know that that is just not true. And it doesn't seem to have any shed of doubt that that may be the case. So it makes this really hard when you're trying to find definitive information, when it acts like it's definitive and it's not. Another maybe unsurprising thing, and this can go both ways, but it's really not very good at coming up with new ideas. It's good at kind of piecing together ideas to come up with things that would be considered new ideas. And we'll see that in some examples. But often, even when it does this, it's lacking what I call humility, like kind of our human nature and spirit and the ability to come up with new ideas. So I can ask it to come up with writing poems about ridiculous things that have never been, written before, and it can do that. But sometimes it fails to really understand the human spirit, if that makes sense, because sometimes that's something that's so difficult to define in words, and much of those words don't end up in the training set. So an example I asked it to do, I hope you all don't take offense to this, but I asked it to make up a joke about Wyoming librarians. And it came up with a joke. It's not a very good joke. You kind of see where they're going with it, but it just really, it's a challenging task for a computer, even a very advanced computer like this, to come up with a good joke. Sometimes it does better than others, but I just thought this was a great example there. All right, now we can really dig into the meat and potatoes of this, and that's what can you do with tools like ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT questions. I think that's where many people start out in playing with this tool. I hope this is correct. You all would know better than I. I asked it where the first library in Wyoming was, and it said it was the Laramie County Library, established in 1886. It's really good at answering questions, especially if they are in the realm of common knowledge. I wouldn't consider this question to be that of common knowledge, except unless it was a group like this. So it can really dig into the details. If you could search for something on Wikipedia, I think Wikipedia is one of its major sources for training, then it's probably going to find the answers. So that kind of level of notoriety, it's able to normally answer questions regarding things like that. And I also hope this is correct too. I believe it is. I asked it, where might I find a travel guide to Costa Rica in a library that uses the Dewey Decimal System? And it said 917.286. Feel free to call me or ChatGPT out on this, but it's even more specific types of things that might require a little more type of understanding. It can still find pretty unique information out there. And you can also ask it really deep and profound questions, and questions that, obviously require a bit of humility to answer, but it'll do its best to kind of provide its perspective. So I said, what's the meaning of life? And it kind of gives you, some ways of thinking about that. So really, it'll try to answer almost any question, unless it's maybe a more inappropriate type of question, which ChatGPT does have some of those borders on there to really try its best to steer its work into a productive area rather than something that could be hateful or unproductive. And this is maybe something I feel like when ChatGPT first came out, immediately people just started talking about the ways it can write essays for high school students. It definitely can generate content in a pretty amazing type of way. I asked it to write a book report on the Virginian, and sure enough, it was able to create a book report on the Virginian. One limitation I didn't really talk about earlier is there are some technical limitations to the length. It's normally referred to as the context, and really the context is both the question plus the answer, and it's roughly a word count. They use a concept called tokens, which don't completely translate to words, but they're very similar to words. And in ChatGPT, the context would also include any previous chat that was a part of the chat message that was used to generate this. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you can use this in a more conversational way, where I can ask it to refine this book report in a particular way as a continued part of the dialogue that happens. But all that together is turns into the context, which is limited. So you're not able to, at least today, we're not really able to in one fell swoop ask it to write a 200-page dissertation or thesis or something like that. You could do it in pieces along the way, but it's not going to be able to do that all at once, given that limitation of context. But right now, you should be able to do pretty easily in the realm of 10,000 characters, something like that. You can ask it to generate more, something that's maybe a little more complicated and maybe a little more creative. I doubt a lot of papers have been written on something like this. I asked it to compare the protagonist of Crime and Punishment to the protagonist of Disney's Frozen, and it does its best to find comparisons in there. And you can ask it to do all kinds of wacky things like this, like compare what it's like to live in Cheyenne, Wyoming to what it's like to live in Timbuktu, and it'll try to figure out a way to do that. It didn't do a great job of writing a joke about Wyoming librarians, but it did a decent job, I think, of writing a limerick about a Wyoming snowplow driver. It did its best. So you can ask it to write limericks, poems, lyrics to a song of any kind of genre. It can write sonnets, Definitely not as well as Shakespeare, but it will try its best. We'll talk a little bit more later about how you can squeeze more out of this powerful tool of its ability to generate content, but it can create creative content as well. Not as well as a human being, because like I said earlier, it really lacks that humility, but it'll try its best to find words that rhyme together that have to do with a particular subject.
You should send that limerick to YDOT.
That's a great idea. This is the type of problem that where I find that it can really do well for any kind of information worker. I asked it to draft an email to potential donors for a new library collection on Native American poetry. And it comes up with this, and it's not perfect. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit more shortly on how we can make it more perfect, but it's great at least giving, like, it'll definitely get your brain working on coming up with ideas. If you ask it to do something like this, even if you're not going to use it, you can likely take from some of the ideas it might have. Much like if you had an assistant, you could bounce ideas off your assistant. You can absolutely do that with a tool like this. What it actually does better, in my opinion, than generating content is editing content. And I think that this is one of the most powerful, immediately useful tools that we can get out of ChatGPT. So I just kind of tried to write poorly here for a second. I asked it to edit this paragraph to make it more readable. And it did a decent job of doing that, making it a little more digestible. But it's really great at leveraging the examples of, I want to say well-written work, but it's trained on enough what OpenAI would consider to be important works that it's able to have a pretty great grasp of the English language. And honestly, it's able to grasp any languages that it was trained on, and it's in some capacity trained on most languages of the world. So that's another thing that we'll touch on here in a little bit, but it's great at editing text. It can summarize content, and this is a little bit like editing it in a way. It's a tactic you could use. This is using the paid version of ChatGPT, where I actually took the 80-page academic research paper that right before ChatGPT came out, GPT-3 was the most advanced large language model. And I was able to just dump in this PDF and say, based on this paper, in one paragraph, explain GPT like I'm a 5th grader. And it does a pretty good job of not only digesting all that information and summarizing it, but then making it in a way that a 5th grader could understand. It's quite remarkable, because frankly, this is an 80-page paper that would take me days to really digest and understand. It can write computer programs, which is, as somebody who works in the realm of software development, it's both incredibly exciting and incredibly scary at the same time. Here I ask it to write a program in the computer programming language Python that can generate Fibonacci numbers. So that's where we add the previous 2 numbers in the sequence together. So 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, and so on and so forth. And here it gives you a program that can do that. You could say generate the first 20 Fibonacci numbers, and it would do that. And it also will be really useful in explaining what it did. As somebody who's devoted his life to computer programming and software development, I wish I had something like this when I was learning, because it is so great to have a very knowledgeable, although not perfect, it makes mistakes, assistant next to me where I can bounce ideas off of it. Here I say, I have this script here, and it has an error, fix the error, and it's able to actually reformat it and fix the error, which is amazing. It's amazing because, you know, sometimes in the world of computer programming, I might be banging my head against the desk for hours trying to figure out a simple little error, and it's able to figure it out very quickly. It can translate text. Like I said, it's trained on, I don't know exactly how many languages it's trained on, but it's probably over 100 languages, and it actually does, in many ways, it does better than most of the other translation techniques that are out there that came before these large language models. I asked it something simple here to translate this text to Spanish, and it does a pretty good job there. But you could just as easily translate text from Spanish into Esperanto, and it would be able to do that just as well. And then I asked it to translate into Pig Latin. It can do that. I think it can even do really weird, obscure things like Klingon, or even some of the languages from Lord of the Rings. So it's, I'm not joking when I say it can translate almost anything. It can even translate computer programs. So I took a really simple program that was coded in Python, and I said, hey, translate this from Python into C++, and it's able to do that as well. And then it also kind of explains, you know, what its thought process was along the way. It can plan a project, and this is something that I'll touch on a little bit near the end when I talk about kind of what I would consider the future of AI to be. But I ask it here, I need to plan a birthday party for my boss, give me a list of 10 tasks to work on, and it gives a pretty decent kind of pathway. So once again, it's kind of a great way to think about if you had an assistant and you wanted to give them a task, you could ask it to kind of come up with a list of things to do and then work on them, and kind of iterate on that by having a conversation. But it does a pretty great job. Where this gets interesting, and we'll touch on this, is what would happen if I said, okay, next thing I want to do is just take one of these tasks at a time, and I just say, determine a suitable date and time for the party. It could potentially start to do even more work for you. Now I'm going to kind of talk about some techniques that can be used in order to get the most out of a tool like this. I try to keep those early examples basic, and these are going to kind of dig a little bit deeper in order to get better results. Often with ChatGPT or other types of generative AI, things like, you know, we can also generate images using very similar types of tools. In fact, they're baked into ChatGPT, and whatever you put into that prompt is going to really, if you put more effort into your prompt, you're going to get a much better result out at the end. And that's the case for generating content or asking questions or generating things like images. I think that one of the reasons why ChatGPT took the world by storm about a year ago was because you were able to have a conversation. Previously, one of the simple things that ChatGPT added was the ability for these questions at the bottom to understand everything that came before it. There was already reasonably good technology that could do just one of these things. But the ability to iterate on this and ask more and try to get more out of it really moved the needle hugely. So much like you might have an assistant, you wouldn't get a great mission statement if you just said, write a short mission statement for our nonprofit. Imagine that your assistant had no knowledge of what the nonprofit was. Makes it even harder. So here I ask it to do things like add something about ending world hunger, and then I say make it more playful, and you can kind of interact with it until you get really what you're looking for out of it. Similarly, so you can just be specific from the get-go, and that's incredibly powerful here. So instead of just asking for a mission statement for my nonprofit, I say write a short 1-paragraph mission statement about our nonprofit based in Laramie, Wyoming, that's trying to help end hunger locally by incentivizing local farmers and ranchers to donate food to local food banks and soup kitchens. It should fit the grassroots nature of our small but ambitious project. And it does a much better job of writing a mission statement because we were much more specific about what we wanted and what we were. And even then you could continue to refine this by just having that conversation like we did on the previous tip. Another thing you can do is you can give it a role. I can say you are a marketing copywriter for a nonprofit consultancy that helps forge new nonprofits with a focus on being able to raise money while maintaining authenticity. And then write a short mission statement for a local nonprofit that sources food for local food banks by connecting them to local food producers. And it's able to go deeper and understand better really what angle to approach the problem. Also, it really helps to describe exactly what you're looking for. And while that might seem simple, you know, it has such a general type of mind that it's not always able to, it's making a lot of guesses along the way. So the more specific you can be both on what you are giving it as well as what you want it to give you, the better it can do. So in this case, I said, I'm going to give you a review of a local state park. Respond only with positive, negative, or neutral. And it's able to take these reviews I made up and really put them in those buckets. But you could say respond only with positive, very positive, negative, very negative, or neutral, or you could really choose any kind of buckets, and it would do its best to do exactly what you're asking of it. Another really great tactic, you know, if you ask your assistant to write a mission statement for your nonprofit, they would likely have a lot of questions for you, and you can actually ask it to ask you those questions. So I said, I need to write a mission statement. What information do you need from me to make it a good one? And it'll go ahead and say, well, I need the name of your organization, its purpose, target audience, values and principles, unique selling propositions, and so on and so forth. And I have no doubt in my mind, if you go through and you answer all these questions, then you're going to get a much, much, much better mission statement than if you just said, hey, I need a mission statement for my nonprofit. You can also, if you're asking it, you know, a broad question, you can ask it, what types of assumptions is it making, and what kind of reasoning does it come up with to come up with its response? So here I said, first write a short mission statement for a local nonprofit aiming to end food inequality, and then explain your reasoning and assumptions. And it goes through and says, well, I'm assuming that it's a local approach. I'm assuming that what you're aiming to do is this. And it goes on and really, it makes these assumptions, and you can kind of say, well, really, what we're doing has nothing to do with, let's say, education, and you can squelch those assumptions that it's making. And then you can give it examples, and this is where it can become an incredibly powerful tool to do your work for you in a lot of ways. So I said, here are a few examples of taglines that I like. Write one for my local hunger nonprofit. And it kind of starts to understand a little bit about what I'm looking for, and then it's able to give its own take on it. Feeding hope, nourishing lives. And of course, you could have that same conversation afterwards with it to refine it to really what you're looking for. Here are a few texts I've sent my wife lately. Write one that tells her I'll be late from work because a meeting went long. And it tries its best to kind of have a similar tone, use similar type of language as to what I might have used previously. So if you want ChatGPT to write an email for you and you don't talk like ChatGPT, then that's problematic when people are receiving emails and they're like, did you actually write this? But if you give it enough examples of things you've written previously, then it's going to do its best to speak in a similar kind of tone. I also wanted to, I know that there are several people in education on this call, and so I wanted to talk briefly about, the role of ChatGPT in classrooms, because I know it's a hot topic. I will be sharing, in some ways I'll be sharing opinions here, but and maybe ideas, because this is pretty, even though ChatGPT is a year old, it's still rapidly evolving every day. But I think one of the big questions that people would have would be, how can you prevent students from cheating? And it's I actually thought I had another slide here, but I guess I don't. The first thing I wanted to talk about was, can you detect that something was generated using ChatGPT? And unfortunately, despite the fact that there are many, many tools marketed out there that suggest that they can do that, they are only going to go so far. As you use ChatGPT, you do start to notice some types of patterns that could potentially be detected by a tool like that. But you got to remember that the ChatGPT its purpose is really to act like a human being, and it's incredibly good at it, and it's also changing all the time. So it's tools like that, they're going to work a little bit, but they're not going to be definitive. And what I'm trying to say is, even if a tool like that said that, yes, ChatGPT was used for this, it's really almost impossible to prove it. It's not like searching for plagiarism where you can find, well, this is the document that you plagiarized. It's really not the case. One way I think about models like this is, it's almost like a folk song. It'd be like trying to prove that Bob Dylan plagiarized all of the literal canon that went before him that influenced him, even though he might have taken a couple of words, stitched them together with a couple of words from some other work. It's really hard to definitively say that he plagiarized. It's really similar in this kind of a context. So I put some ideas here on how you might prevent students from cheating. These are just my own personal ideas. One thing I would do is lean into some of those limitations that I talked in earlier. It's only trained on, pretty commonly known information. So if you could relate an assignment to the students and ask them to reflect and relate their own life to, let's say, some literary work or some event in history, well, ChatGPT can't do that very well. You could potentially, the student could maybe talk a lot about themselves and then ask to relate, but you can't just say, relate this assignment to me. doesn't know enough about you as the individual. And then of course, having students show progress, show multiple drafts, show how they came up with it, the answer to the problem. Although even then it's really challenging because you can ask ChatGPT to show its work and show its kind of reasoning that it used. I think the most important thing though is to teach them the tool and encourage them to use it, teach them how to use it so they know you know about this tool. It's a powerful tool. It'd be a shame to just shut it out from students because it's such a useful tool tools like this are gonna play a big role in how work gets done in the future. And then I'll briefly touch on what I think the future of this looks like. This is more kind of on the opinionated hypothesizations side of things based on what I've seen in the world of AI. I would expect to see larger models, just kind of a incremental iteration over what we have now. So things that are trained on more data so they can answer more questions or create content based on more types of things that are even more niche than before. The bigger the models though, the longer time it takes to train. And so either it's going to take time to get there or it's going to take better computer hardware. GPUs are the main type of hardware. So as that technology gets better, then that might be able to happen quicker. And then also as computer hardware gets better, we might be able to see models that can handle more data. Like I talked about that context limitation with the book report. You might be closer to getting it to be able to write a 100-page paper as that kind of moves forward. More interestingly, I think, is that over time we're going to see new creative ways to use these models. I kind of touched on it a little bit with the plan a project thing, but if you could imagine it breaking those tasks down into, give me a list of tasks, and then it slowly started to work on one of those. I'll kind of touch on that as well here in a second. This is what I was talking about, that the idea of agency, the idea of it being able to actually do things on its own. And there are some tools that have come out in the past year, fortunately for, well, maybe fortunately, maybe unfortunately, depending on how you feel about robots taking over the world. They don't work incredibly well, but people have already built systems to give it a broad task. Sometimes the task is as broad as make me some money, and it'll come up with ideas on how to do that, and then it'll just start executing these tasks. Even the paid version of ChatGPT can execute computer code, which might sound at first kind of, well, my computer can do that. But when you can also have it generate computer programs, it could generate a computer program to buy your plane ticket. So you could say, hey, buy my plane ticket, and it can figure out how to do that, kind of iterate over it until it gets the job done. It's kind of amazing and also terrifying at the same time. Fortunately, it's definitely not there. Everything is very experimental and not very useful to the average person, but that could all change very quickly. One of maybe the goals of ChatGPT or the missions of companies like OpenAI are this idea of artificial general intelligence, where if you took everything I just talked about and you took out those limitations, that would kind of be what is known as AGI, or artificial intelligence, where there's like a parity between what a human can do and what these computers can do. The scary part about something like that, though, is there are no human beings that have all of this body of knowledge in their brains, and also human beings aren't nearly as replicable as computers. So I think we're still a long ways off from something like this, but at the same time, this is definitely the direction that foundational models exemplify in a lot of ways, and definitely are the direction that they're trying to head. Whether or not they're going to get there is maybe a technical as well as philosophical kind of question that there's surely no definitive answer to today, but it's definitely what the future looks like is at least a progression towards something like this. And I've talked a lot, so I hope some of y'all are sticking around. I'd love to answer some questions. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Carter. That was very informative. I'm not sure if you can see the question box, Carter.
I think I can, but I don't see any questions in it.
Okay.
Is that correct?
I don't see any either. I know while we were waiting for everything to get sorted, there were a couple of comments. Let's see. Jeanette Bradley was asking about how do we develop our own AI literacy so we can keep our audience's needs met. So how do we go about developing more of this? How do we, I guess, learn more about AI? What resources can we use to, I guess, inform ourselves and our staff about AI?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, Jeanette, hopefully you're a step closer to doing that already. I think that one of the easiest things to do is to really just search for ChatGPT. You can sign up for a free account, and I would suggest that everybody on this call take some time to play with it, to explore, and that's a great place to start, because immediately, if you're as curious of a human being as I am, you immediately start to discover what it's capable of, as well as what it's not capable of. And I think that that's a great place to start. And I think that not only that, but I think it can help you all in your day-to-day jobs. I think that there's like maybe the AI gets way bigger than what I just talked about, where these foundational models are maybe the most easily accessible to the average person because they offer such a broad set of use cases, and they're trained on such a broad set of knowledge out there. I think that it's increasingly a common topic in the news. So unfortunately, it's easy to kind of understand a little bit about, what other types of AI might be out there, as well as, I think just having conversations, just like with anything that's, a hot topic, having conversations with other people is really interesting, because there's one thing I really tried to stray away from on this is ethical ramifications of this, which we could have entire webinars on just the ethics of, is this okay? And when is it okay? And when is it not okay? But having those conversations amongst yourselves, I think that also will help inform you and give you the ability to inform people that are asking questions about it at libraries.
Thank you. Another question has to do with prompt engineering. As far as this person has been trying to come up with ideas for a course series name that is for computer classes at the library, and has been having trouble phrasing that so that ChatGPT will understand what they're looking for. So I guess that has to do with just, how to phrase it so that ChatGPT gets you what you want.
Yeah, well, I didn't call what I talked about prompt engineering, but mainly because I think that there's, we could go a lot deeper in a lot of the things we talked about here, naturally. So almost all of those techniques that I explained that you might use to get better results out of ChatGPT. That's all maybe the most basic type of prompt engineering. And so hopefully there were some takeaways from those. You can get much deeper with prompt engineering when you start thinking about this in a more programmatic kind of way, where I almost touched on it with the kind of the semantic classification I had to do with like the reviews of local parks, and I just kind of, you know, gave it kind of a framework to operate in and told it how I wanted it to work, and then I kind of just played with it over and over again, and I got the results. But there are some incredible guides. Like I said, I don't have I'm on somebody else's computer right now, so I don't have links, but I'm happy to add some other resources on here and then share this slide deck with anybody who's interested, and I'll add what I think is probably the best resource for prompt engineering that is regularly updated and mainly contains some more advanced kind of techniques for how to really get a lot out of, even more out of something like this, and potentially something that's a little more programmatic kind of way. So hopefully that'll help.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you. And then Kate also said this was a very helpful overview, and I love the idea of using ChatGPT for project management. Do you have any suggestions for trainings and or maybe thought leaders that would help us see how people are using it as well?
Oh, I know that there are many courses. I haven't personally taken any courses on this, but I think that if you just did some searches on the internet, and also that prompt engineering guide would also kind of apply to this. There are definitely a lot of courses out there. I just unfortunately don't know what the best ones are, but it is a very exciting, powerful tool for things like project management, and it's one of the places where you can get a lot out of a tool like this. So I wish I had a better answer for you, Kate, but maybe that prompt engineering guide will help. But I would suggest just maybe trying some of the main course providers, like Coursera is a great one, Udemy. Almost all of them now have prompt engineering courses that would go even deeper into what I talked about here.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much, Carter. This was very illuminating. I tried to do a little bit of research before this just so I'd have something to talk about if need be, but also to have a direction and some context for what you were providing. But this was really very helpful. Prior to this, I haven't really had no baseline for ChatGPT other than it's scary, but also very powerful. So thank you. Does anybody else, are there any more questions or comments about this presentation? And again, thank you everybody for being so patient. As we work through technology, it's still not 100% smooth, but I definitely think it was worth it. So thank you for working with us too, Carter, and moving so rapidly to a different computer.
Thank you all so much for taking interest in this topic. And like, I want to just echo that. I really appreciate your patience on, I know I wish I was here sooner. I know you're busy people, so I really do my best to honor your time, and I really appreciate you all sticking around and your patience in that early part of the presentation. And if other questions do come up, my email address is down here at the bottom. Feel free to reach out. Even if you just want to bounce ideas or questions off me, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. All right, well, thank you again, Carter. And with that, I am going to close out the meeting, the webinar.
Thank you all.
Maybe I will.